"You're suspicious. Leave this neighborhood immediately." The shout hit me the moment I stepped outside the lakeside cabin. Diana Cross, a president of the Ho and self-declared guardian of all things proper A, was standing there, her finger stabbing the air toward my duffel bag, which held nothing more sinister than maps and a portable radio. She accused me of preparing for some kind of criminal activity and threatened to call the police. For weeks, she'd been shadowing me simply because she'd noticed my regular visits to the cabin. I'd caught glimpses of her lurking around, snapping photos, clearly convinced she was onto something big. Today, she was ready to set things straight. Minutes later, a police cruiser roared into the street. Diana folded her arms, a smug smile plastered across her face until the officer stepped out, saluted, and said something that made the entire neighborhood fall silent. That was just the start of the fastest unraveling of a person's reputation I'd ever seen. 3 weeks earlier, my assignment had begun as a simple geological survey at the old Morrison cabin overlooking Lake Harmony. The morning sunlight turned the lake to liquid gold as I unpacked my equipment, its familiar weight sparking memories of my military days when accuracy was a matter of survival. The cabin's position was perfect, secluded enough for delicate work, but close enough to town for quick supply runs. What I hadn't counted on was drawing the laser-like attention of Diana Cross, Queen of Maple Street, who lived in the grandest home in the area. From my first day, I'd noticed her curtains twitch whenever I arrived. I brushed it off at first. After all, nosy neighbors exist everywhere, and after 25 years in the army, I knew how to tune out distractions. But Diana wasn't just nosy, she was relentless. By the second week, her observations had turned into a full-blown surveillance campaign. She hid behind trees, crouched behind hedges, even staked out unparked cars, all armed with a camera fitted with a telephoto lens and a thick yellow notebook. Through my cabin window, I watched her scribbling like a court stenographer, logging my arrival and departure times, listing every item I carried, even sketching diagrams of my antenna setup. It was almost impressive, almost. When I mentioned it to my 16-year-old son, Tommy, over the phone one evening, he laughed and said, "Dad, you've got a suburban stalker. Maybe she thinks you're digging up a buried treasure or something." If only he knew how close his joke was to reality. Her fixation deepened. She bought a 50-meter measuring tape and began mapping out distances, cabin to road, property line to hydrant, even the height of my antenna, though she nearly strangled herself in tree branches trying to measure it. Day by day, her notebook swelled with her evidence, and then came the morning she finally made her move. I was loading gear into my truck when she marched out from her post near the mailboxes. Her hair was perfectly styled, her pantsuit pressed like she'd dressed for a board meeting. The measuring tape dangled from her wrist like a bizarre bracelet, and her notebook bulged with papers. "Excuse me," she called, with the tone of someone used to being obeyed. "We need to discuss your unauthorized activities on this property." The word unauthorized landed like a gavel strike, as though she were the law itself. I set down my gear and faced her, keeping my expression calm, an old habit from decades of dealing with tense situations. She stopped in front of me, chin up, clipboard in hand like a badge of office. "I'm Diana Cross, president of the Maple Street Homeowners Association," she declared. "I've been monitoring your activities for 3 weeks, and I have documented evidence of suspicious behavior that violates community standards and possibly federal regulations." She flipped through her notes dramatically, reading off her list: unauthorized use of electronic devices, potential surveillance activities, trespassing on community-adjacent property, and failure to register your extended presence with the Ho. Her voice grew louder with each accusation, carrying across the still morning air. I had to give her credit, she was thorough, even if she was dead wrong. But beneath her rigid posture and righteous tone, I noticed something else, a flicker of desperation in her eyes, a slight tremor in her hand as she gripped the clipboard. This wasn't just nosiness, something was driving her harder than neighborhood pride. I'd seen that look before in soldiers carrying invisible burdens. As she rattled off regulations that sounded entirely made up, I began to wonder what had truly set her on this path. I had no idea her motives were rooted in something far darker than suburban politics. Her grand finale was pulling out her smartphone. "I'm recording this for legal and community safety purposes," she announced, starting to film while clumsily trying to untangle her measuring tape, a strange dance of authority and awkwardness. It might have been funny if her accusations weren't growing heavier with each passing sentence. "Sir, you need to show identification, explain your purpose here, and answer questions about your activities," she demanded, "or I'll have no choice but to contact law enforcement." She said law enforcement as though it were a magic phrase that would finally bring me to heel. Clipboard in one hand, measuring tape dangling from her wrist, smartphone poised as she looked like a one-woman task force preparing for the takedown of her career. But Diana Cross had no idea what kind of domino effect she was about to set in motion. When the wail of sirens began bouncing across Lake Harmony, she must have thought her moment of glory had arrived, her big win against the neighborhood menace. She couldn't have guessed she was actually laying the groundwork for her own spectacular undoing. After our initial face-off, she stormed home with the brisk, purposeful stride of someone convinced they were saving their community from imminent disaster. Through the cabin's window, I watched her pacing her porch, phone pressed tight to her ear, gesturing wildly with her free hand. Even from a distance, I could tell she was spinning our little interaction into something far more dramatic than reality. Within minutes, her version of events had turned me into a heavily armed stranger with military-grade gear at clear and present danger to the peaceful residents of Lake Harmony. Her voice carried easily across the morning air. "Yes, I need police immediately. There's a suspicious man with what appears to be military surveillance equipment. He has black bags, radio devices, and he's been monitoring the neighborhood for weeks." Her 911 call was almost artistic in its distortion. My geology tools became covert military hardware. My routine schedule was proof of surveillance patterns. My perfectly legal rental of the cabin somehow morphed into an authorized occupation of community property. And judging by the sirens drawing closer, the dispatcher had taken her at her word. In just minutes, she had inflated a misunderstanding into a situation designed to spark a full police intervention. But Diana wasn't done. Hanging up with 911, she instantly switched her phone to video mode and launched into what might be the clumsiest live broadcast I've ever seen. "Good morning, everyone," she began, adopting the tone of a war correspondent reporting from a front line. "This is Diana Cross, Ho President, coming to you live from Maple Street, where a serious situation is unfolding, one that threatens our entire community." Holding her phone out at arm's length, she tried to keep both herself and the cabin in frame while juggling a clipboard and that ever-present measuring tape. The result was a jerky, dizzying video more like a parody than a real report. "For the past 3 weeks," she continued, voice rising dramatically, "I have been documenting the suspicious activities of an unidentified man using military-grade surveillance equipment to watch our neighborhood." The live stream quickly unraveled. She attempted to zoom in on my truck with one hand while waving her notebook with the other, creating nauseating camera swings. She claimed my radio was sophisticated communications equipment and my black duffel bags could be holding anything. Half the time her camera wasn't even pointed at me, just the ground, or the side of her own house. The measuring tape wrapped around her ankles more than once, nearly sending her sprawling. At one point, she almost dropped her phone entirely, yet never broke her stern, authoritative tone. I quietly filmed her on my own phone, certain this footage would be valuable later. The real entertainment came from her audience, a modest number of neighbors watching the live feed, their comments popping up on her screen. "What's going on? Are you okay, Diana?" Each question she took as proof of her leadership. "That's right, Mrs. Patterson. We must be vigilant. This is exactly the type of threat we can't ignore." The irony was thick. She was framing herself as the neighborhood's protector while creating the biggest disruption the street had seen in years. The sirens grew louder. Curious neighbors began stepping outside, drawn to the noise and to Diana's loud, self-important narration. Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived 3 houses down, leaned toward me and whispered, "Don't believe a word. She's done this before, 3 families, maybe more. Calls the cops, causes chaos, scares people into selling cheap." Her words landed like a heavy puzzle piece snapping into place. This wasn't paranoia, it was a calculated tactic. And just as that realization sank in, I spotted my son Tommy at the end of the driveway. 16 years old, looking both worried and confused. He'd come running at the sound of the sirens. His eyes darted between me, the small crowd forming, and Diana still in full theatrical mode, still live-streaming her own fiction to the world. "Dad, what's going on?" Tommy asked. He was trying for casual, but the worry in his voice gave him away. I rested a hand on his shoulder, feeling that familiar weight of being a parent, not just protecting your kid from danger, but shielding them from the kind of stress they don't need to carry yet. "It's just a mix-up, son. She thinks I'm doing something I'm not. It's going to be fine," I told him, hoping my voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Do you trust me?" I asked. I needed to hear it. Tommy looked me in the eye with that unshakable trust only a child can give. "Always, Dad," he said simply. Just then, a patrol car rounded the corner. Diana was mid-climax in her live stream, her voice echoing down the street. "And here they come. Justice will be served, and our neighborhood will be safe again." She planted herself between the cabin and the approaching vehicle like some self-styled hero in a final showdown. Clipboard clutched high, measuring tape draped neatly over one arm, phone still broadcasting to her online audience of baffled neighbors and curious strangers. I caught her expression as the police slowed to a stop, a pure satisfaction. She looked like a woman convinced her weeks of effort were about to pay off. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Officer Miguel Santos. His movements were deliberate, his posture calm, the kind of composure you see in someone who's handled more neighborhood drama than they can count. Early 40s, grain at the temples, compact build, and something else, a faint but unmistakable military bearing. His eyes swept the scene, Diana in full theatrical mode, the gathering crowd, me standing quietly beside my surveying equipment. His gaze lingered on me for a moment, like he was trying to place a face he half remembered. Diana, oblivious to all of it, leapt into her monologue. "Officer, thank goodness you're here. I'm Diana Cross, president of the Maple Street Ho, and I've been investigating this man's suspicious activities for the past 3 weeks." She shoved her clipboard toward him like she was testifying before Congress. "As you can see from my documentation, he's been running unauthorized surveillance with military-grade equipment, violating multiple community rules and possibly federal laws. I have photos, timestamps, and exact measurements of all his illegal actions. I want him removed immediately." Her certainty was absolute. She clearly expected handcuffs within minutes. Santos listened with professional patience, nodding occasionally, jotting in a small notepad. He gave nothing away, but he kept glancing back at me with that same flicker of recognition. When Diana finally stopped for air, he turned to me. "Sir, I'll need to see some ID," he said in an even, respectful tone. I pulled out my wallet and handed over my driver's license. His eyes dropped to the name and something changed. His shoulders squared, his grip on the license tightened slightly. He looked back at me, slower now, more deliberate. "Benjamin Carter," he said, almost like he was testing the name out loud. His eyes widened, and then to the astonishment of everyone watching, he stepped back, straightened to attention, and gave a sharp military salute. "Good afternoon, Lieutenant General Carter, sir," he said with unmistakable respect. The street froze. Diana's livestream fell silent as her phone sagged in her grip. Mrs. Rodriguez gasped. Tommy's eyes lit up, caught between pride and confusion. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Diana's reaction stole the scene, a disbelief giving way to confusion, then frantic denial. "That's impossible," she blurted, pointing her measuring tape at Santos like a sword. "He's lying. Real military officers don't hide in cabins spying on innocent neighborhoods." Santos lowered his salute but kept his posture respectful. "Ma'am," he said clearly, "I served under Lieutenant General Carter in Task Force Omega during our deployment to Afghanistan. He saved my unit's lives in a particularly rough operation in Kandahar Province. A broken bar back in 2018, Santos finished, his voice carrying the kind of weight you can't fake, a mix of gratitude and deep respect. "I can personally vouch for his integrity and his service to this country. Whatever he's here for, I promise you it's legitimate and probably more important than any of us realize." The words rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. You could almost see the neighbors recalibrating everything they thought they knew about the quiet man who had been working out of the old cabin. Diana, though, wasn't ready to surrender her narrative. That's when the measuring tape incident happened, a moment destined to become local legend. Determined to reclaim the upper hand, she tried to show Santos the precise measurements she had taken to prove my supposed crimes. But her hands shook so badly she couldn't manage the tape, and the demonstration spiraled into a comedy routine. What began as a confident explanation of the cabin's distance from the road, exactly 47.3 meters, turned into the 50-meter tape wrapping itself around her ankles, looping her clipboard, and eventually ensnaring Santos himself. "Officer, you see, this position violates subsection 12 of the community standards," she persisted, even as she looked like she was fighting her way out of a giant yellow spiderweb. Santos, still trying to help her untangle, somehow kept a straight face, but the scene was becoming impossible to take seriously. For me, though, the bigger moment was hearing the emotion in Santos's voice when he'd spoken about our shared service. I remembered him now, a young sergeant who had kept his head during a convoy ambush that could have cost us everything. Seeing him here, steady and successful in civilian life, filled me with the kind of pride that never fades for a commander. "Miguel Santos," I said, shaking his hand. "I should have recognized you." "How's civilian life?" He smiled warmly, gripping my hand with both of his. "Better than I deserve, sir. This town's treated me well, and I've done my best to return the favor. But I'll admit this isn't what I expected when I saw the call address today." His laugh was contagious. Even the crowd, now realizing the emergency was nothing more than Ho theater, began to relax. But Diana's eyes told me she was far from finished. That determined set to her jaw wasn't going anywhere. She was already pulling out her phone again, muttering about military privilege and civilian jurisdiction. Miguel gave me a look, just a subtle shake of his head that said, "You haven't seen the last of her." "Sir," he murmured, "Mrs. Cross doesn't back down. If things don't go her way, she escalates." As if on cue, Diana stepped forward, phone recording once more. "Military rank means nothing in a civilian neighborhood," she announced loudly, making sure Santos and I heard every word. "This isn't martial law, and I don't care if he's a 5-star general, he still has to follow community standards." Her voice carried the sharp edge of someone used to corporate boardrooms and executive authority, and unwilling to let any title outrank her in her own domain. When Santos left moments later for a traffic accident elsewhere, Diana shifted into her next gear. Within minutes, she had transformed from overzealous neighbor to something closer to a crisis PR manager. From my cabin window, I watched her pacing the driveway, firing off emails at lightning speed and making rapid-fire phone calls, her tone alternating between urgent and indignant. Her assistant, a jittery young man, arrived within 20 minutes, armed with a laptop, a high-end camera, and what looked like prepared talking points on a tablet. It was clear now she wasn't just defending herself, she was launching a coordinated campaign. The first blast of emails hit the neighborhood almost immediately. Mrs. Rodriguez showed me one forwarded from a neighbor. I had to admire the precision of it, even knowing the danger in her approach. The subject line read, "Emergency Community Safety Alert. Unauthorized military surveillance in Maple Street neighborhood." The message itself was pure corporate spin, full of implications, careful phrasing, and the unmistakable signature of someone who knew exactly how to frame a story for maximum effect. Diana's email framed the situation as a potential breach of civilian privacy by military personnel acting without proper clearance. She implied that my presence was the start of a dangerous trend, one that could threaten both property values and neighborhood safety. Somehow, she had taken the respectful moment of recognition from Santos and twisted it into evidence of a covert military program spying on innocent homeowners. Her message came complete with polished, official-looking charts and diagrams, and maps of supposed surveillance activity, data logs with timestamps and coordinates, turning her amateur notes into something that looked straight out of an intelligence briefing. But her most revealing move came not in writing, but during a phone call she made loudly enough for anyone within half a block to hear. She dropped a "Nemia Mr. Jayanga," and suddenly her strange urgency made perfect sense. From her side of the conversation, it became obvious that Diana was under immense pressure from an overseas business partner, one heavily invested in a high-end development that required acquiring certain properties in our neighborhood. "No, Mr. Zhang," I understand the schedule, she said, her tone sharper now, edged with anxiety. The lakefront lots are critical for the resort project. Yes, I know the contracts are already signed, but this military complication has made the acquisition sub broken bar difficult. In that moment, the puzzle pieces fit together. Diana wasn't simply a meddlesome whole leader with too much free time. She was a developer under foreign pressure, trying to secure properties whose owners had no interest in selling. That's when Dr. Emma Walsh chose to step into the drama. She lived at the end of Maple Street, in a small blue house, and had been quietly observing the day's events from her garden. As Diana's argument with Mr. Jong reached its peak, Emma strolled over, silver hair catching the sun and eyes sharp with the kind of intelligence that came from decades of noticing what others missed. "Quite the morning," she said, her smile carrying an undercurrent of amusement. "Tell me, what sort of geological survey needs that level of security clearance?" The question was posed casually, but I instantly knew Emma wasn't just a friendly retiree. When she revealed she was a former CIA analyst specializing in foreign intelligence, I was hardly surprised anymore. 23 years with the agency, she explained, before retiring 6 years ago to this peaceful lake community chosen, she admitted wryly, for its supposed lack of excitement. Project Lakeshore, she added quietly, lowering her voice as her eyes flicked toward Diana's animated pacing. "That's why you're here, isn't it?" The fact she knew the project name confirmed my assignment at the cabin was less of a secret than I had hoped. Emma could be either a valuable ally or a dangerous complication. "Let's just say," I replied, choosing my words carefully, "that some projects require highly specific environmental monitoring, and some places have value far beyond their scenic views." Emma's nod told me she understood perfectly. Years in intelligence work had trained her to read between the lines. Meanwhile, Diana's conversation had reached a breaking point. "I understand the financial impact, but I can't create evidence out of nothing," she said, her voice losing that hard corporate polish. "The military situation was never part of the plan. It's thrown off the entire acquisition schedule." Emma glanced at me. "If I were betting," she said in a low voice, "I'd say Ms. Cross promised these lots to her investors before she actually secured the sales. Now she's scrambling to deliver, likely to some very unhappy foreign backers who've already spent a fortune planning this resort." It was a chilling thought, but it explained everything. Diana wasn't merely targeting me, she was trying to destabilize the entire neighborhood. Her obsessive note-taking, a cover for property surveys, the dramatic live streams, part of a coordinated effort to paint Maple Street as troubled community, lowering market values and speeding sales. Even her ridiculous measuring tape theatrics were part of a calculated pressure campaign. Emma summed it up with precision. "She's not just fighting you, Ben. She's fighting the clock on a massive international deal that falls apart if she can't deliver these properties in time." Almost on cue, Diana ended her call and turned toward us. Her expression sharpened into the kind of smile you'd see before a corporate takeover. Emma, unfazed, suggested we check the cabin for anything unusual. Her tone casual, but her eyes focused like a professional who'd just identified a genuine security risk. Emma's eyes flicked toward the cabin as Diana's voice still rang out over the neighborhood, sharp with urgency. "I think it's time we had a real talk about why you're here, Ben," she murmured, the polished mask of a retired neighbor slipping to reveal the focused demeanor of a career intelligence officer. She strode toward the cabin, not like someone heading into a cozy lakeside hideaway, but like an operative stepping into a secure site. "Project Lakeshore," she said matter-of-factly as I unlocked the door. "We both know it has nothing to do with geological surveys." The way she stated it less a question, more a foregone conclusion. It told me she'd been quietly digging into my activities well before Diana's grandstanding had turned me into the neighborhood spectacle. Once inside, her gaze swept over the interior with practiced precision. She moved methodically, noting every piece of advanced equipment and electromagnetic frequency analyzers, satellite uplinks, a top-tier seismic monitoring unit, items far beyond what a legitimate environmental study would require. "This is intelligence-grade hardware," she said, fingertips brushing the console's edge, "the kind designed to track communications, chart movement, and detect threats across a wide area." She stopped at one particularly sensitive device, her expression sharpening. The real question isn't what you're measuring, it's what you found that has Diana Cross scrambling to get you out of here. Her instincts didn't lie. Without hesitation, she reached behind an old fishing calendar on the wall and straight to the hidden compartment I hadn't told her about. The speed and confidence with which she exposed the small safe told me her retirement was far from complete. "Mind if I?" she asked, already poised over the keypad. When I gave a short nod, she tapped in a sequence I didn't recognize. The lock disengaged, revealing a stack of documents stamped with classification markings that had no business sitting in a lakeside cabin. "Well," she said, sliding the top folder onto the table, "this explains quite a bit about you, and about Diana's sudden desperation." Spread across the table, the files reframed our entire neighborhood as the center of something far larger. Emma read with the familiarity of someone who'd written such assessments herself. Project Lakeshore is a joint intel mission to track suspected foreign espionage operations hiding behind tourism and property development, she explained. The focus is a network of Chinese intelligence operatives quietly buying up land near strategic U.S. military sites. Her eyes lifted from the page, mixing professional admiration with unease. "You're not just watching Diana's real estate plays, Ben. You're monitoring an entrenched espionage effort years in the making." And Diana a broken bar whale. She's either a knowing collaborator or an oblivious pawn in it. Emma's own laptop appeared from her vehicle a few minutes later, a sleek, encrypted, and far beyond civilian tech. Her fingers danced across the keys, pulling live intelligence feeds like she still had full agency clearance. "Jiang Wei," she said, opening a detailed dossier with photos, financial trails, and operational notes. "Officially, he's a senior VP at Pacific Rim Development. Unofficially a PLA Strategic Support Force graduate, connected to at least 6 similar property grabs near U.S. defense sites in the past decade." She barely paused as she dug deeper. "Diana founded her company just a year and a half ago. Seed money, offshore accounts tied to shell companies with documented links to Chinese state-owned enterprises. Since then, she's been running a deliberate harassment and disruption play to push property values down and force quick sales." Emma typed a final sequence, sending a secured message. "That's a priority alert to the agency. It'll trigger an FBI counter-intel review inside of 2 days. We've just compressed her window." According to these intercepts, resort construction is set to break ground in 6 weeks. She has until then to close on the rest of the properties for her handlers. The reality hit hard. Our sleepy lakeside street was ground zero for a ticking espionage deadline. "This isn't just petty politics anymore," Emma warned. "She's operating under foreign directive ESA, and the tighter her schedule gets, the more dangerous she'll become." That evening, Tommy's arrival broke the tension for a moment while also adding another piece to the puzzle. "Dad," he began as he flopped onto the couch, "kids at school are saying you're some kind of general. And Mrs. Rodriguez told Mom that Diana's offering crazy cash if people sell right now." Like me, he had an instinct for noticing patterns. And now, even my son was seeing the edges of the bigger game. Tommy's observations about Diana's actions revealed an awareness that would have impressed seasoned intelligence officers. "She keeps going on about how property prices are about to plummet because of security risks," he said. "But when I asked why she hasn't put her own place on the market, she just dodged the question." That simple teenage skepticism confirmed what Emma and I already suspected. Diana's scare tactics were a calculated effort to manipulate the neighborhood. His input added another layer to our understanding of how far her pressure campaign had spread. Talking with Tommy that night reminded me how, at 16, you're old enough to start grasping that some jobs in the government aren't just about paperwork or routine meetings. "Sometimes my work means stopping people who want to damage our community or our country," I told him, deciding that honesty was more valuable than the illusion of a safe, ordinary career. "And that can make certain people like Diana Cross very unhappy when federal oversight throws off their plans." He took it in with a maturity that told me he understood the weight of what I was saying. It was a reminder that families tied to national security often need to know at least part of the truth about the dangers involved. As Emma wrapped up her final security sweep before heading out, she uncovered new communications evidence suggesting the timeline we were working with had just tightened dramatically. Tomorrow, it seemed, would bring problems we hadn't anticipated. The following morning, Diana's hastily announced home meeting was set for 10 sharp, but by 9:30, the community center already felt more like a campaign event than a neighborhood get-together. She'd drawn a crowd of curious locals, 2 newspaper reporters, a political blogger, and a few unfamiliar faces who carried themselves with the polished confidence of people skilled at shaping public opinion. Diana herself looked nothing like the flustered developer from the day before. Her hair was styled to perfection, her navy power suit immaculate, an image straight from a corporate boardroom. She stood at the front with a laptop, projection screen, and stacks of handouts, looking ready to dismantle my credibility in a single, well-choreographed performance. Her presentation kicked off with what she called a timeline of suspicious activities, a slick slideshow that recast 3 weeks of routine geological survey work into what she claimed was proof of organized criminal surveillance. She'd somehow acquired satellite photos of the lake area, annotated with arrows and captions that suggested patterns of movement and intent of fabrications dressed up as evidence. As you can see from these documented surveillance patterns, she announced with the poise of a CEO giving a quarterly report, this individual has been systematically monitoring our homes, our children, and our daily lives under the false cover of government work. The crowd was clearly impressed by the professionalism of her visuals. What made her accusations so dangerous was her skill at twisting mundane actions into sinister narratives through selective editing and omission. Then, the back doors opened and in walked Emma. She didn't raise her voice, didn't hurry. She just moved to the rear of the room, opened her laptop, and began quietly pulling up data from sources no ordinary retiree could access. Within minutes, she had connected to the center's projection system, ready to deliver a counterstrike presentation that would make Diana's polished effort look like a student project. "Excuse me," Emma said, her voice cutting through Diana's speech with firm politeness. "I believe there are some factual issues with your timeline that everyone here should understand before drawing conclusions." Her tone was the kind that could stop a room cold. A confident, experienced, used to staring high-stakes briefings. The report she projected was pure, methodical intelligence work of financial ledgers, intercepted communications, and clear links between Pacific Rim Development Corporation, Diana Cross, and a coordinated effort to acquire properties near key military facilities. It was the kind of presentation you didn't argue with, you just tried to keep up. Emma's slides told a different story, one with wire transfers from offshore banks, suspiciously timed property purchases, and encrypted communications with foreign interests that had no business in American real estate. "What you've been told is a local safety issue," she said evenly, "is actually a foreign intelligence operation more than 2 years in the making." The room was still processing that when Tommy walked in, a USB drive in hand and the kind of determined look teenagers get when they've found something big. He'd spent the night digging through social media like a pro, uncovering Diana's manipulation tactics far beyond Lake Harmony. With a few keystrokes, he had her financial disclosures, coded emails with development partners, and most damning, a series of recorded calls she'd accidentally live-streamed, coordinating with overseas contacts. Then Santis arrived with backup officers. His voice carried the weight of official clearance. "Mr. Carter is operating under federal authorization on an active national security investigation. Interference will be treated as a federal crime." That was the moment Diana's phone rang. Caller ID told her it was from her foreign handlers. Every reporter in the room noticed. Emma took the cue, projecting the final proof. Blueprints showing the resort would hide communications towers designed for military surveillance and not recreation. Neighbors who had defended Diana minutes before now turned on her. Mrs. Rodriguez revealed she'd been pressured for months with threats and inflated cash offers. Others chimed in, forming a chorus of testimony that made the scheme undeniable. By the time Diana returned from her phone call, the FBI convoy had arrived. Agent Sarah Chen strode in, badge displayed. "Diana Cross, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit espionage, wire fraud, and violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act." The Miranda rights were read in front of neighbors, reporters, and a wrecked slideshow. In a final bizarre act, Diana grabbed her measuring tape, announcing it was exactly 48.7 meters to freedom, before tangling it around two agents and a folding chair. The Ho voted Mrs. Rodriguez in as president before lunch. The resort project was killed, property values jumped, and Santos earned commendations from both federal and local authorities. Emma's retirement was officially over, and Tommy's work became a high school forensics case study. That night on the cabin porch, Tommy asked the question I'd been expecting. "Now that this mission's done, are we staying or moving on?" "There's always another mission," I said, "but we'll face it together." My secure device buzzed in new orders. Colorado mountains, a new cabin, a new neighbor of interest. Ashley Rodriguez, 28, travel blogger with an unusual curiosity about military contractors. Tommy glanced at the screen and grinned. Another cabin, another suspicious neighbor. But this time, we know what to watch for. Somewhere in the community center, Diana's abandoned measuring tape lay in a heap, a reminder that the most dangerous threats sometimes come wrapped in the strangest obsessions.